The air in Boston that October felt like something out of a dream. Crisp but gentle, golden leaves swirling in the wind as if the city itself had decided to celebrate with us. That was the day I became Mrs. Emily Parker Whitmore. I can still see the lights of the grand ballroom, the gleam of crystal glasses, and the way Daniel's hand felt wrapped firmly around mine when we said our vows. Everything about that wedding shimmered. My parents had insisted on doing it properly, and Daniel's family was just as proud. But to me, the magic wasn't in the chandeliers or the champagne. It was in the way Daniel looked at me when I walked down the aisle, like I was the only person in the world. We had been together for 3 years before that day. 3 years of stolen weekends, late-night walks along the Charles River, and long conversations about the future we wanted. When he proposed, I didn't hesitate. I knew he was the one. Daniel was already making a name for himself as a promising young attorney, while I had just finished my degree in communications and started my first real job. We were young, ambitious, and in love, ready to build a life together. The wedding felt like the culmination of every dream I'd carried since I was a little girl, and the honeymoon that followed only deepened that feeling. Daniel made even the simplest moments special. Whether it was trying new foods at tiny restaurants, holding my hand on crowded streets, or whispering how lucky he felt, I believed him. I believed in us. The first years of our marriage were as close to perfect as anyone could imagine. Our apartment in Boston wasn't big, but it was ours. We filled it with books, framed photographs, and the scent of candles I insisted on buying every season. Daniel worked long hours at his law firm, often buried in case files, but he always came home with a smile. He'd drop his briefcase by the door, kiss me on the forehead, and ask about my day as if nothing mattered more. On weekends, we carved out time just for us. Sometimes it was as simple as walking through Boston Common. Sometimes it was trips we saved up for. Cape Cod in the summer, Maine in the fall. Every vacation became a small ritual of love. Daniel taking care of everything, me marveling at how he managed to balance work, responsibility, and still make me feel cherished. Friends often joked that we acted like newlyweds even years after the wedding. I didn't care how it looked. It was true. I would catch him watching me across the room and blush like a schoolgirl. He had this calm strength about him, a patience I'd never seen in anyone else. Even when things went wrong, missed trains, sudden downpours on trips, little accidents, Daniel never lost his temper. Instead, he'd laugh, find a solution, and somehow make me laugh too. I told myself more than once that if men with angelic tempers truly existed, then I had married one. He wasn't just my husband. He was my partner, my safe place, my miracle. Looking back, it's almost painful how flawless those years felt. I had no reason to doubt him, no reason to fear the future. At that time, if someone had asked me to describe my life in one word, I would have chosen blessed. Because that's how it felt, like I had been given a gift so rare, so fragile, that nothing could ever take it away. Or so I thought. Not long after our 3rd anniversary, Daniel came home with a look in his eyes that I had only seen a handful of times before. It was the look he got when he was standing on the edge of something big. He hung his coat, loosened his tie, and sat across from me at the kitchen table. "Emily," he said, "I've just taken on a case unlike anything I've ever handled. This one could define my career." He wasn't exaggerating. His client was a powerful businessman in Boston, the kind of man who appeared in financial magazines and had his name on museum wings. The case? A divorce. Not just any divorce, but one involving assets that stretched into the hundreds of millions, mansions, art collections, antique jewelry, entire portfolios of investments. The wife was demanding half, though she had never worked a single day or contributed to his businesses. I listened as Daniel described the mountain of documents, the endless meetings, and the sheer weight of what was at stake. Part of me was proud. This was proof of how far he had come. At such a young age, to be trusted with something of this scale spoke volumes about his talent and reputation. But another part of me was uneasy. The way he described the wife, relentless, demanding, manipulative, made me worry about what he was stepping into. "Are you sure this is worth it?" I asked him one night as he reviewed paperwork, well past midnight. "It sounds exhausting, Daniel, and dangerous in its own way." He smiled at me, that calm, reassuring smile I had fallen in love with. "Emily, this is what I was trained for. I know how to handle people like her. And besides, it's not just about money, it's about justice. He built everything with his own hands. She's trying to take what she never earned." I wanted to believe him, and for the most part I did. Still, as I watched him bury himself in briefs and depositions, a knot formed in my chest. When he finally sat down with the wife, the stories he told me afterward made my skin crawl. She carried herself like royalty, despite coming from nothing, and demanded a lifestyle that would cripple her husband financially. Daniel, with his composure and sharp mind, cut through her arguments one by one. He reminded her that most of the assets had been acquired before their marriage. He pressed on the fact that she had lived a life of luxury funded entirely by someone else's effort. In the end, she folded. She accepted a large apartment and a generous monthly allowance, but nothing close to the half she had been fighting for. Daniel came home that evening with a spark of triumph in his eyes, though he never gloated. "It's settled," he told me, slipping off his watch and setting it on the counter. "The papers will be signed tomorrow." He's satisfied, and frankly, so am I. True to his word, his client was more than satisfied. The man embraced Daniel in gratitude and immediately arranged for a hefty transfer to his account as payment for services. It wasn't just money, it was validation, recognition that Daniel Whitmore was a force to be reckoned with in the world of law. When Daniel called me after leaving his client's office, I could hear the relief in his voice. "Emily, I'll wrap everything up tomorrow morning, and then I'm coming straight home. No more late nights, no more endless calls. Just us." I remember smiling as I set the table that night, believing him, believing that once this storm passed, we'd return to the life we loved so much. That Friday evening, I wanted everything to be perfect. Daniel had promised the case was finally over, that he would be done with the endless negotiations and paperwork. I stopped by the market on my way home and bought his favorite wine, along with ingredients for a simple but elegant dinner. I wanted us to have a night to ourselves, away from clients, courts, and the constant stress. When my phone rang, I was setting candles on the table. Daniel's voice came through the line, warm and a little tired. "I'm in the garage now, Emily. Give me 15 minutes, and I'll be home." I laughed softly, telling him not to rush. "Drive safe. Dinner's almost ready." The call ended, and I felt a flutter of excitement. I lit the candles, dimmed the lights, and turned on the playlist we always used during dinners together. The apartment filled with the comforting aroma of roasted chicken and herbs. I imagined the look on his face when he walked in, saw the candles, and realized I had been waiting just for him. But 15 minutes passed, then 20, then 40. I called his phone, thinking maybe he'd been delayed by traffic. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. I frowned, checking the clock again. Something didn't feel right. Daniel always kept his word. Even if he was running late, he would have called. By the time an hour had gone by, my hands were trembling. I called the parking garage where he usually left his car. The attendant confirmed what I already feared. Mr. Whitmore picked up his car about an hour ago. He should have left already. That was when the panic hit me full force. I threw on a coat and hurried downstairs, scanning the street as if he might suddenly appear around the corner. I walked block after block, checking familiar spots, calling his name under my breath. Nothing. The city felt too big, too dark, and suddenly hostile. I called my parents. My voice cracked as I tried to explain, but there wasn't much to say. Daniel had left the garage. He had never made it home. Next, I called the police. They took my statement, asked for details about his last known whereabouts, what he had been wearing, what car he drove. The words felt surreal leaving my mouth, as if I were describing a stranger and not the man I had kissed goodbye that very morning. Hours slipped by in a blur of phone calls and tears. My parents rushed over, sitting with me in the candlelit apartment that now felt unbearably empty. The chicken had gone cold, the wine sat unopened. Every creak in the hallway, every car horn outside made me jolt, hoping it was him. But midnight came, then 2 a.m., then dawn, and still there was no sign of Daniel. That night was the beginning of a nightmare I could never have imagined. My husband had vanished, as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. One moment he was calling me from the garage, promising he was on his way home. The next he was gone without a trace. The days that followed Daniel's disappearance blurred into each other like a fog I couldn't escape. The police opened an investigation, but their words were cautious from the beginning. Adults have the right to disappear. One detective reminded me gently, though his tone made it clear he didn't believe that was the case here. They checked traffic cameras, questioned the garage attendants again, even canvassed nearby streets. But nothing. No witnesses, no accidents reported, no trace of his car. It was as if Daniel had simply vanished into thin air. I couldn't accept that. I called his phone every hour, left voicemail after voicemail. I checked local hospitals, imagining he might have been in an accident and was waiting for me to find him. Every time the phone rang, my heart leapt, only to crash back into emptiness when it was a friend, a neighbor, or another officer with no news. My parents and Daniel's parents stepped in quickly, trying to steady me. Together, we hired a private investigator, someone who promised he'd dig deeper than the police could. We printed posters with Daniel's photo, plastering them around Boston, on lampposts in grocery stores near subway stations. I posted his face online, begged for any information, even the smallest clue. Strangers reached out with sympathy, some with false leads, but none of it brought him back. Each morning, I woke up hoping it had been a nightmare, that I would roll over and see him lying next to me, breathing softly, the way he always did before work. But the bed was cold and reality was merciless. Weeks stretched into months, and with them came a slow unraveling of my mind. The constant questions: where was he? Was he hurt? Had someone taken him? Gnawed at me until I could no longer sleep, no longer eat. My body felt hollow, my hands shook without warning, and every corner of our apartment screamed his absence. Eventually, my parents made the decision for me. One evening, they guided me into the car and drove me to the hospital. I was admitted for treatment of severe depression and exhaustion. Lying in that sterile room, I felt like I had failed, not just as a wife, but as a human being. I couldn't find him, couldn't even hold myself together. Nights in the hospital were the darkest. But slowly, with therapy and medication, I began to surface from the depths of despair. When I was discharged, nothing in the world had changed. Daniel was still gone. But I realized I had two choices: drown in grief or find any way to keep moving. My doctor urged me to establish a routine, to find work that would occupy my hands and mind. So I did. I accepted part-time jobs, simple things at first, tasks that forced me out of bed in the morning. It wasn't about money. It was survival. The busier I was, the less room there was for the crushing silence of our empty apartment. I told myself it wasn't moving on. It was simply moving forward, one fragile step at a time. Work became my lifeline. After the hospital, I knew I couldn't let myself sink back into the void. My doctor had been right. I needed something to occupy my mind, something that demanded focus and routine. That was when I accepted a position helping an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, a former ballet dancer who had once graced stages in New York. She lived alone in a modest but charming apartment near the Charles River. Age had taken much of her mobility, so she needed someone to cook, clean, and run errands. At first, I felt clumsy, out of place, like I didn't belong in her world of old posters, trophies, and the faint scent of lavender that lingered in every room. But Mrs. Henderson welcomed me warmly, and little by little, I found comfort in the rhythm of caring for her. The work didn't erase the pain, but it dulled the sharp edges. I swept floors, prepared simple meals, and listened as she reminisced about performances from decades past. There was something soothing about her stories, how she had loved, lost, and kept going. She didn't know the details of my own tragedy, but sometimes when she caught the faraway look in my eyes, she'd gently pat my hand and say, "You'll find your way too, dear. Grief never leaves us, but it teaches us to move." Over time, word spread that I was reliable and hardworking. Other families in Boston began calling me for occasional help. Deep cleaning, house sitting, light organizing. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept me busy, and for that I was grateful. My days filled with tasks that left my body tired enough to sleep at night. Still, no matter how hard I tried, Daniel was always there in my mind. A song on the radio, a suit hanging in a client's closet, even the scent of his cologne on a stranger passing by. It all pulled me back to him. Some nights, I woke up convinced I had heard his key turning in the lock, only to be greeted by silence. Then came the day that changed everything. I had been hired to clean a grand estate in Back Bay, a sprawling townhouse owned by Victoria Reynolds, a woman whose name carried weight in Boston's business circles. The place was immaculate in a way that suggested money had smoothed over every corner. Marble floors, sweeping staircases, rooms lined with expensive art. I was dusting the shelves in the library when I heard it. A voice, deep and steady, drifting from the hallway. My heart clenched so hard I nearly dropped the vase in my hands. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But the cadence, the tone, it was Daniel's voice. I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears, straining to catch every word. It was just casual conversation, muffled by the distance, but every syllable pierced me with recognition. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then I shook my head, gripping the edge of the shelf to steady myself. No, it wasn't real. It couldn't be. I was imagining things, creating ghosts out of thin air because I missed him too much. That had to be it. And yet, my hands wouldn't stop trembling. I told myself it had been a trick of memory, a cruel echo conjured by loneliness. But the thought of that voice lingered, haunting me with every step. So when Victoria Reynolds called me again a few weeks later to return to the townhouse, I felt a knot of dread twist inside my stomach. Still, I went. Work was work, and I couldn't refuse. I was wiping down the marble counter in her kitchen when the sound of the front door opening startled me. Footsteps echoed through the hallway, confident, measured, achingly familiar. I turned, rag still in my hand, and froze. He walked in as though he belonged there, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in an expensive suit. For a split second, the world tilted. My heart leapt into my throat because I knew that face, even though it wasn't exactly the same. It was Daniel, but not the Daniel I had last kissed goodbye. His hair was shorter, neatly styled. A jagged scar traced along his left cheekbone. His eyes, once warm and steady, now seemed distant, guarded. And when those eyes landed on me, there was no flicker of recognition, no softening, no smile, only a faint narrowing of suspicion, as though I were nothing more than an intruder in his world. "Mr. Alexandrovich," Victoria's voice rang from the hallway, smooth and polished. "You're home early." I felt my knees weaken. Alexandrovich. That was the name she used. My mouth went dry as I whispered his name under my breath. "Daniel!" He glanced at me briefly, but there was no spark of memory. Nothing. He simply nodded toward Victoria, then walked past me without a word. It felt as though someone had carved open my chest. I stumbled through the rest of my tasks, my hands trembling so violently that I nearly dropped the dishes. When I finally left the house, the cold air outside hit me like a slap. I could barely breathe. That night, I sat with my parents at their dining table, recounting everything in broken fragments. "It was him," I insisted, gripping my mother's hand as though it could anchor me. The scar, the voice, the way he moved, it was Daniel. But he didn't know me. He looked right at me and my voice cracked. Nothing. My father frowned, exchanging a worried glance with my mother. Emily, grief can play cruel tricks. Are you sure? I am sure, I said fiercely, tears burning down my cheeks. I know my own husband. They didn't argue, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. That was when I called the private investigator again. This time, I begged him to follow Victoria, to uncover who this so-called Dmitry Alexandrovich really was. Weeks later, he returned with the truth. The pieces fit together in a way that made me shiver. Daniel had been attacked the night he disappeared, beaten, and left unconscious near the entrance to Victoria's estate. She had found him, taken him in, and when he awoke, his memory was gone. With her influence and wealth, she arranged new documents under a new identity. And just like that, my husband became her husband. Hearing it out loud left me numb. Daniel hadn't chosen to leave me. He hadn't abandoned our life. He had been stolen, reshaped into someone else's story. And the worst part, he didn't even know it. The night I received the investigator's report, I barely slept. By morning, my decision was made. I walked into the police precinct with trembling hands, but a steady voice, carrying every piece of evidence I had. I showed them photographs, timelines, and the investigator's written statement. Dmitry Alexandrovich, I said firmly, is my husband, Daniel Whitmore. He disappeared 2 years ago. He didn't run away, he was taken. The detective listened carefully, his expression unreadable. At first, I feared he might dismiss me, chalk it up to a grieving widow's delusion. But when he examined the scars, the matching dental records, the timeline that lined up too perfectly to be coincidence, his tone shifted. We'll look into this, he said, but you have to understand, it won't be simple. The next days were agonizing. The police questioned Victoria Reynolds. She arrived with her team of attorneys, polished and unshaken, as though she were walking into a business meeting rather than an interrogation. At first, she denied everything, but as the evidence piled up, she conceded just enough to protect herself. Yes, she had taken in a man who had been found near her home, injured and confused. Yes, she had provided medical care. Yes, she had given him a new life. But in her version, it wasn't abduction, it was charity. He had no memory of who he was, she told the officers. He was vulnerable. I cared for him when no one else did. He became my husband because he wanted stability, because I gave him a home. Her words made my stomach twist, but the detective wasn't swayed. Daniel, Dmitry, was ordered to undergo medical evaluation at Massachusetts General Hospital. They needed to know if his amnesia was real, if his identity matched the records I had provided. The day they transferred him, I stood in the hospital corridor, palms damp, heart racing like I was about to face a stranger and a ghost at once. When they wheeled him into the examination room, I caught my first clear look at him without the barrier of Victoria's presence. It was Daniel, my Daniel. The shape of his jaw, the curve of his shoulders, the small scar on his right wrist from when he'd cut himself opening it years ago. I stepped forward, whispering his name. Daniel, it's me, Emily. He looked at me with polite confusion, as though I were nothing more than another doctor or nurse hovering nearby. I'm sorry, he said quietly, his voice calm but empty. I don't know you. The words cut deeper than any knife. I tried again, showing him a photograph of our wedding, our life together. His eyes lingered on the image, but instead of recognition, there was only unease. Then he turned his head, searching the room until he found her. Victoria stood in the corner, arms crossed, eyes sharp. And when Daniel's gaze landed on her, it softened. That's my wife, he said simply. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. In that moment, I realized this battle was only beginning. The court ordered that Daniel stay with me and my parents while the doctors worked on his memory rehabilitation. It felt surreal preparing the guest room for him, knowing that just a few years ago we had shared a life, a bed, a future, and now he was a stranger under our roof. At first, he was polite but distant, speaking in short, careful sentences. He thanked my mother when she made him breakfast. He nodded when my father tried small talk about sports, but his eyes remained clouded, as if he were trying to map out a world that didn't fit. When I approached him with photo albums, his posture stiffened, but he didn't turn away. I laid the album on the table one evening, my hands trembling as I turned the pages. "This was our wedding," I whispered, pointing to the photograph of us beneath a canopy of autumn leaves in Boston. His younger self beamed from the photo, eyes bright with joy. Daniel studied the picture carefully. His gaze lingered on the tuxedo, the smile, the way his arm wrapped around me. For a moment, something flickered, an almost imperceptible softness. But then it was gone. "It feels familiar," he admitted, "but I can't place it." I swallowed hard and tried again. I told him about our trips to Cape Cod, about how he once carried me across the beach because my shoes had broken. I described the night he had stayed up until dawn, helping me rehearse for a presentation, even though he had court the next morning. Little pieces of our life, hoping to light a spark. He listened quietly, sometimes tilting his head as if the stories brushed against the edge of his memory. But when I asked if he remembered, he only shook his head, his voice heavy with frustration. "I want to, Emily, but it's like trying to grab smoke." Meanwhile, Victoria refused to let go. She showed up at the hospital during his checkups, hovering in the waiting area with flowers and expensive gifts. Once, she even appeared outside my parents' house, demanding to see him. I closed the door in her face, but not before hearing the desperation in her voice. "He's mine now," she hissed. "You're clinging to the past." Her words burned. But I reminded myself this wasn't about winning or losing. This was about Daniel's truth, his life, our marriage that had been stolen from us. Still, I couldn't ignore the way his eyes wavered whenever her name was mentioned. At night, I sometimes found him standing by the window, staring into the dark, shoulders tense. "It's like I'm split in two," he confessed once, his voice low. "Part of me feels safe here, with you, but another part feels like I owe her everything. She saved me." I wanted to scream that she had only taken advantage of his broken state, but I held my tongue. His pain was real, his confusion undeniable. All I could do was stay close, reminding him of the life we had built, hoping that somewhere inside, my Daniel was still there, waiting to come back to me. It was the doctor who suggested we try something different. "Sometimes memory isn't restored by pictures or stories," he explained. "Sometimes it takes a place, a sensation, to trigger what the brain has locked away." His words stayed with me until one evening, when I found myself driving Daniel back toward the garage where he had last called me, the place where his life with me had ended. As we pulled in, I felt my chest tighten. The structure hadn't changed. Same rows of concrete pillars, same fluorescent lights humming overhead. To me, it was a graveyard of hope. To Daniel, it was still just a parking garage. He stepped out of the car slowly, scanning the rows as though trying to make sense of why we were there. "Emily, I don't," his voice trailed off. His hand went to his temple. "Just walk with me," I whispered. We moved down the ramp together, our footsteps echoing. I led him toward the spot where his car had been parked that night. As soon as we stopped, his body stiffened. He gripped the railing beside him, breath quickening. And then it happened. He staggered, clutching his head, and let out a choked sound. His knees buckled, and I caught his arm to steady him. His eyes were wide, pupils blown, and tears spilled before he could stop them. "I remember," he gasped. Images poured back into him, jagged and violent. He told me in broken phrases, men stepping out of the shadows, fists slamming into his ribs, the sharp metallic taste of blood in his mouth, hands dragging him across cold pavement, then darkness. When he woke, Victoria was there, telling him his name was Dimitri, telling him his past was gone. His voice broke as he pressed his forehead against my shoulder. "Emily, I didn't leave you. I never left you." I wrapped my arms around him, tears streaming down my own face. I know, I whispered fiercely. I knew something was wrong. I never stopped believing. We stood there in the hollow quiet of the garage, clinging to each other as though we could make up for every lost year. For the first time since his disappearance, I felt Daniel's embrace, not as a stranger's, but as my husband's. When we returned home, the police were waiting to hear everything. Daniel gave his statement, describing the ambush in as much detail as his memory allowed. The detectives' faces hardened. This was no random attack. They reopened the case immediately, launching a full investigation into who had orchestrated it. For the first time in years, there was movement, momentum, a path toward justice. As for me, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Hope. Not the fragile, desperate hope that had haunted me since his disappearance, but something stronger. Daniel remembered. He was mine again, and together we would find the truth. The investigation moved quickly once Daniel's memories returned. His testimony, combined with the private investigator's earlier findings, gave the detectives a clear direction. Within weeks, the truth came into focus. The attack had not been random, nor was it some desperate act by strangers. It had been orchestrated by none other than the man Daniel had defended in the divorce case, the wealthy businessman who had so desperately wanted to protect his fortune. It was almost unthinkable. Daniel had won that case, saved the man millions, and yet, behind the scenes, enemies were made. The wife's family, furious over the settlement, had connections, money, and more than enough bitterness to act on their anger. They had paid for Daniel to be silenced. Permanently, hearing the details made my blood run cold. I could picture it so clearly now. Daniel stepping into the garage, unaware of the shadows lurking, unaware that his life was about to be ripped away. The men who carried out the attack were eventually tracked down, arrested, and charged. And with them, the names of those who had ordered it came to light. Justice, long overdue, was finally in motion. The day the indictments were announced, Daniel and I stood together outside the courthouse. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, but I barely noticed. All I cared about was the way his hand tightened around mine, grounding me in the reality that we had survived. He had survived. From there, the process of restoring his identity began. It was strange, seeing official documents with another man's name erased and replaced with his true one, Daniel Whitmore. He was no longer Dmitry Alexandrovich. He was my husband again, legally and irrevocably. The moment the paperwork was finalized, I felt as though a chain had been broken. Victoria Reynolds fought the decision at first, clinging to the life she had built with him. She appeared in hearings, argued that she had saved him, loved him, and deserved to keep him. But in the end, even she couldn't deny the truth. He wasn't hers. He never had been. When the final ruling came down, I saw her face in the courtroom. Beautiful, composed, but utterly devastated. She looked at Daniel one last time, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and then she turned away. It would be easy to hate her, to reduce her to nothing more than a villain. But part of me understood her grief. She hadn't attacked Daniel. She had found a broken man and built a life around him, however misguided. Losing him must have felt like losing the ground beneath her feet. For us, though, it was the beginning of something new. Daniel moved back into our apartment, though it took time for both of us to adjust. The memories were there now, but fragile, like glass that had been shattered and pieced back together. Some days he woke with fragments missing, and I would remind him patiently. Other days he remembered things I had long forgotten, small details, private jokes, and we would laugh until tears filled our eyes. We learned to live slowly, deliberately, savoring what we had nearly lost. Dinners at home felt sacred. Walks through the city became a quiet celebration. Even the ordinary moments, folding laundry together, sharing coffee in the morning, carried weight and meaning. We no longer assumed time was promised. We cherished it as the gift it truly was. Looking back now, I realize our story was never about perfection. It was about resilience, about choosing each other, even when the world tried to tear us apart. Love doesn't erase suffering. It doesn't shield us from betrayal or loss, but it endures. It heals. And sometimes it brings us back from the very edge of forgetting. I once thought I had lost Daniel forever. Now, every time he takes my hand, every time he says my name with recognition in his eyes, I know the truth. Real love can survive even the cruelest storms. It can overcome loss, deception, and even the shadows of memory itself. The morning sun filtered lazily through the cream-colored curtains of the Boulder Hillside Hotel. Clara Bennett sat at the edge of the bed, still in the silk robe she'd worn while getting ready for the wedding the night before. Her heels were tossed in the corner. Her carefully curled hair was now a soft mess. The smile she had worn all day for her brother's wedding had long disappeared, replaced by the quiet exhaustion of someone who had given too much. She reached for her phone to check out of the hotel and pay the bill. That's when everything changed. She opened her banking app out of habit, but the number that stared back at her didn't make sense. Her balance had dropped to $1,632.34. Just last weekend, it had been over $10,000. Her breath hitched. She blinked, thinking there must be a glitch, a misread, a joke. Her thumb hovered over the Transactions tab, and then she whispered almost to herself. David, her boyfriend, David Callahan, was buttoning up his shirt across the room. He turned at the sound of her voice, immediately catching the panic in her tone. What is it? My account, Clara said slowly. $8,400. It's gone. David crossed the room in seconds, took the phone from her hand, and scrolled quickly through the transaction history. His brows furrowed. These transfers, you didn't do these? Clara shook her head. No, the screen showed 3 major withdrawals made in the span of 20 minutes, all timestamped just the night before. $2,000 to a credit card in the name of Lauren Hughes, her older sister, for $1,000 to an account under Carter Hughes, her brother-in-law, and $2,400 to Barbara Bennett, her mother. Clara's lips parted, but no words came out. She remembered taking a quick shower while David had stepped out to get them late-night tea. Her phone had been on the nightstand. David's voice dropped, clipped and sharp. That's identity theft. Unauthorized access. Clara stared at the wall. The nausea came in waves. Just then her phone rang. It was her mother. Still in a daze, Clara answered, putting it on speaker. Hi, sweetheart, Barbara chirped. Just wanted to say thank you again for yesterday. Ethan looked so happy. Clara sat up straighter. Mom, I need to ask you something. Barbara hummed lightly. There were several transfers made from my account last night. Thousands of dollars. Do you know anything about that? There was a pause and then a bright laugh. Honestly, I thought it'd be more than that. Lauren said your account had more than she expected, so we just split it up. It's for Ethan, honey. Think of it as your wedding gift. Clara's blood ran cold. What? Her voice cracked. Carter's voice echoed faintly in the background. You're always loaded, but don't really use it. It was for a good cause. Come on. David stepped closer. His jaw was locked, his voice low but firm. That's theft. What you did is a federal crime. Barbara's tone shifted slightly, cooler now. Let's not be dramatic. We're family. Clara's always been self-focused. This is her way of helping. She's single, she earns well. Of course, she should contribute. Clara reached for the phone, hands trembling. How did you even get into my account? Lauren's voice chimed in. I used your phone. Your password hasn't changed in years. It was easy. And with that, the line went dead. For a long moment, neither of them moved. David was the first to speak. We need to leave. But not home, not yet. Clara nodded slowly, numbness flooding her limbs. Her voice came out like a whisper, but her words were steel. We're going to my parents' house. I want to hear them say it to my face. David placed a hand on her shoulder. Stay calm, okay? No matter what happens, stay calm. Clara didn't answer. She didn't need to, because in that moment, something inside her had changed. This wasn't just about the money. It was about what the money revealed, and what it had always meant to them. The drive to her childhood home in southeast Denver felt longer than it should have. Clara didn't speak. Her mind reeled with fragmented memories. Christmas mornings, birthday dinners, the laughter around that living room. All now overlaid with betrayal. David drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally brushing her knee. When they pulled into the driveway, Clara froze. It was a modest brick house with white shutters, utterly ordinary. But today it looked like a fortress of hypocrisy. David cut the engine. Are you sure about this? Clara nodded. They owe me an explanation. She stepped out, each footfall heavy, purposeful. David followed, closely behind. Before they reached the door, it creaked open. Her father, Philip Bennett, stood there in his flannel robe, coffee in hand, as if this were just any other Saturday. Clara? I thought you and David were heading back to the city. She walked past him without a word. Her boots echoed against the hardwood floors as she entered the living room. Lauren was sitting cross-legged on the couch, scrolling her phone. Carter sat beside her, relaxed, sipping coffee from a mug that read, World's Best Dad. Barbara was fluffing a pillow. They all looked up and froze. Clara didn't sit. How did you access my account? Lauren blinked. I already told you. Your phone. While you were showering. The password was still your graduation year. Don't look so shocked. Clara's voice trembled. Why would you do that? Carter leaned back, one arm draped casually over the sofa. Because we needed it. Do you know how expensive it is raising kids? Clara, you live alone. You travel. You buy designer handbags and espresso machines. Meanwhile, we're drowning in expenses. Clara stared at him. So that gives you the right to steal from me? Barbara spoke up, her tone soft and dismissive. Clara, don't make this bigger than it is. We've always supported each other. It's what families do. You're blowing this out of proportion. David stepped forward. No, she's not. What you did was unauthorized access and theft. That's a criminal offense. Philip, who had wandered back into the room, lowered his newspaper. Son, don't bring the law into family matters. Then maybe you should have acted like family, Clara snapped. Lauren scoffed. Oh, please. You think you're better than us because you make 6 figures and live in a high-rise? We're the ones struggling. You think gifts and birthday checks make you superior? That's just your duty. You don't have a family of your own. You should help the one you came from. Clara's breath caught. For years, she had tried to be generous. She bought Harry a laptop for school. She paid for Margaret's ballet lessons when Lauren and Carter couldn't. She thought she was helping, not paying rent for love. Unbelievable, she said quietly. You don't even see it. See what? Barbara asked, arms folded. That I was never your daughter, just your donor. The room fell silent. You think I'm selfish because I kept some part of my life just for me. Because I didn't hand over every dollar the second you hinted. But what about you? What kind of people steal in the night and call it love? Barbara shook her head. We didn't steal. We borrowed. David let out a short laugh. Borrowed? With no intent to return it? With deception and unauthorized use? That's not borrowing. That's criminal. Philip stood up. You need to leave, both of you. This house doesn't need threats or drama. David turned to Clara. You ready? She didn't respond. She looked at the faces around the room. Her sister's disdain, her mother's detachment, her father's indifference, her brother-in-law's smug entitlement. This was her family, and they didn't even flinch. We're done here, she said, turning for the door. But this isn't over. As they stepped outside, Carter called out, "Don't be so mad, Clara. With your salary, you'll make it back in no time." Clara stopped, but didn't turn around. "No," she said, "you won't." And with that, she closed the car door, severing something silent but final. The drive back to Denver was silent, but Clara's thoughts were anything but. She stared out the window, her reflection staring back at her with hollow eyes. Her family had just stolen from her, lied to her, justified it, and somehow still believed they had done nothing wrong. Every word they said echoed in her mind, not with confusion, but with clarity. David's hands were tight on the steering wheel, his jaw set. When they got back to Clara's apartment, he placed her phone on the kitchen counter and poured 2 glasses of water. "Do you want to talk?" Clara shook her head. "Not yet." Instead, she went to her desk and pulled out a worn folder. She hadn't touched it in years. It held past bank statements, notes from when she helped Lauren with bills, payment confirmations for Ethan's college prep program, even old Venmo transfers labeled Mom's Meds or Ballet Tuition. She flipped through the pages, one after another, until her fingers trembled. There was so much, too much. David approached quietly. "I know this is overwhelming, but Clara, I need to ask you something. What do you want to do?" She looked up. "I don't know. Do you want to let this go?" Clara hesitated. "They're my family, David." He crouched down next to her chair, meeting her eyes. "If a stranger took $8,400 from you while you were in the shower, would you go to the police?" "Of course." "Then why not now?" "Because it's complicated." "No, it's not. It's betrayal, and you didn't deserve it." Clara closed her eyes. She thought back to Lauren's voice. "You're single, you make a high salary, of course you should help." The way Carter had laughed as if she were overreacting, her mother's indifference, her father's silence, and suddenly it wasn't just about the $8,400. It was about every time they had made her feel guilty for being successful, for being independent, for simply living her own life. She turned back to the folder. "I want to know how far this goes." David nodded. "Then let's find out." For the next few hours, Clara dug into 3 years' worth of financial records. She built spreadsheets, highlighted patterns. Each time she paused, David was there with coffee, tissues, or silent support. By evening, she had a rough total. Over $15,000 in requests, loans, or emergencies from her family, most of which had never been repaid. But what struck her wasn't the number. It was the method. They always started with warmth. "We miss you. Harry's birthday is coming up. He really hopes you'll send something nice." Then came the guilt. "It's not easy raising kids. You wouldn't understand." And if she hesitated, the tone shifted. "You've changed. You're so selfish now. You don't care about family anymore." It wasn't just manipulation. It was emotional conditioning. David sat beside her, flipping through the documents. "You see it now, don't you?" Clara nodded. "They trained me to say yes, to ignore my own limits. And I thought I was being loving when I was just being used." He reached for her hand. "This isn't just theft. It's abuse. And it's time you fought back." Clara was quiet for a moment, then asked softly, "Will you help me?" David didn't hesitate. Every step of the way. The next morning, David made a call to one of his colleagues at his law firm, a woman named Camille Dorsey, a seasoned financial crime attorney. That afternoon, she met them in their living room. After reviewing Clara's documents, Camille leaned back. "Clara, this is a textbook case of familial financial abuse. Just because they're blood doesn't mean they're allowed to steal from you." Clara hesitated, "But reporting them, it'll destroy what's left of my family." Camille didn't flinch. "They destroyed it the moment they decided you were a wallet, not a daughter." Clara looked down at the pile of evidence she had gathered. She saw not just numbers and names, but years of being minimized, drained, manipulated. She took a deep breath. "Let's do it. I'm ready." And for the first time in a long time, she meant it. Clara sat on the edge of her couch as Detective Selena Ward laid out a notepad, a recorder, and a quiet confidence that instantly filled the room. She wore no uniform, just a dark blazer, a simple ponytail, and eyes that had seen stories like Clara's more times than they should have. "Ms. Bennet," Selena began, "please walk me through what happened from the very beginning." Clara took a breath, steadying her voice. "It was the morning after my brother's wedding. I opened my banking app, and $8,400 was gone. The transactions were made while I was showering, all to members of my own family." Selena nodded, taking notes. "You believe the access to your account was unauthorized?" "I'm sure of it. My sister used my phone without permission. She knew my password, something I hadn't changed in years. She made the transfers herself. I confronted them. They admitted everything, but said it was family duty. Like I owed them." Selena's pen paused for a moment. "You're not the first case like this, but you are one of the rare ones willing to come forward." "Beside Clara," David added, "we've documented all communications, texts, emails, bank statements over the past 3 years. The pattern is extensive and consistent." Selena reviewed the folders, flipping through the highlighted statements, annotated spreadsheets, and screenshots. Her face remained unreadable. But then she closed the folder gently and looked up. "This is clear evidence of financial exploitation, unauthorized access, theft, coercive behavior, possibly even conspiracy, depending on who coordinated what." Clara's stomach tightened. "What happens now?" "First, a formal preliminary investigation. That includes contacting involved parties, securing digital records, and verifying the legal framework for prosecution. If sufficient evidence is found, we'll forward the case to the district attorney's office." David placed a comforting hand on Clara's back. She didn't flinch, but she didn't relax either. Selena continued, "I have to ask, are you emotionally prepared for what comes next? These are your parents, your sister. Once we initiate the process, there's no undoing it." Clara looked down at her hands. "I don't think I am, but I also know I wasn't emotionally prepared to be robbed by them, and yet they did it anyway." Selena gave a small nod, then reached into her bag and pulled out a few forms. "These are privacy release forms. They'll allow us to subpoena the account logs and transaction histories. Sign when you're ready." Clara picked up the pen and, with only a brief pause, signed each line. The next morning, Clara's phone vibrated nonstop. Missed calls, dozens of texts, all from her family. "Lauren, Anna, did you seriously go to the police? Are you insane? You're going to ruin everything. Carter, my account's been frozen. How am I supposed to pay bills? You've crossed a line. Barbara, the police came to the house. Your father's heart is acting up again. What will the neighbors think? Is that what you want, to kill your father over a few dollars?" Clara replied only once to all of them. "That's your own doing. Don't contact me again." By the afternoon, there was a knock on her apartment door. Clara opened it slowly, already knowing who it would be. Lauren stood there, mascara streaked, eyes bloodshot, and rage clinging to every syllable. "What the hell are you doing?" "We're family." Clara didn't move. "You want to talk? I'll call David." Lauren laughed bitterly. "That lawyer? He's brainwashed you. You used to care." "I still care," Clara said softly, "but caring doesn't mean handing over my life to people who hurt me." Lauren's voice rose. "We didn't hurt you. We asked for help. You stole from me." Lauren's face darkened. "You've changed." Clara didn't hesitate. "That's right. I've changed because you made me." And for the first time, she closed the door in her sister's face without a shred of guilt. A few days after slamming the door on Lauren, Clara stood in her kitchen, staring at a cup of untouched tea. The apartment was quiet, almost unnaturally so. David was working from his office down the hall, giving her space. but space didn't quiet the noise inside her chest. Then the doorbell rang. Clara opened it to find her younger brother, Ethan, standing with his hands deep in the pockets of his hoodie, his eyes full of shame. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. Clara hesitated, then stepped aside. "Yeah, of course." Ethan sat on the edge of the couch like he didn't belong there. "I heard everything about the police investigation, the accounts, Lauren freaking out." Clara folded her arms. "I didn't have a choice." He nodded. "I know, and I want you to know something. I didn't ask them to do any of this. The money, I never wanted that. I didn't know they'd take it from you." Clara looked at him. "Did you know they were planning it?" Ethan hesitated. Then, quietly, "I overheard Lauren and Carter talking about it. A week before the wedding. They said you'd never press charges if it was just a family gift. I didn't think they'd actually do it, and I didn't want to ruin the wedding by confronting them." Clara's voice was hollow. "So you stayed quiet." "I was scared. I didn't want to tear the family apart." Clara sat beside him. "But it already was torn, Ethan. You just didn't see it yet." He looked at the floor. "I want to help. I don't know what I can do, but I'll testify. I'll tell the truth." Clara's breath caught. "They'll disown you too." He gave a small, sad smile. "Maybe. But at least I'll still have my integrity. And maybe you." Clara squeezed his hand. "You always have me." Later that evening, as the sky darkened over Denver, her phone rang again. This time from a number she hadn't seen in weeks. Her father. Clara stared at the screen before answering. "Clara!" Philip's voice came through, weary and strained. "Why are you doing this?" Clara sat down slowly. "You know why. They searched our house. The police took our computers. Your mother hasn't slept in days. Lauren is falling apart. Carter's been suspended from work. And the mortgage company's calling us now. Is this what you wanted?" "No," Clara said, her voice level. "But it's what you caused." There was a long silence. Then, quietly, he said, "You're no longer our daughter." The words hit like cold steel. "You betrayed your family," Philip continued. "You'll never be welcome here again." He hung up. Clara didn't cry. She expected to. She waited for the ache in her chest to crush her. But instead, she felt weightless, unshackled, as if the chain they'd held around her neck for years had finally snapped. The next morning, Detective Selena Ward called. "Clara, we've officially filed charges against Lauren and Carter. Unauthorized access, theft, and conspiracy. Your parents, we don't have enough to charge them criminally, but they may still face civil liability. The preliminary hearing is scheduled for next week." "Thank you," Clara said, her voice steady. Selena paused. "Have you experienced any additional pressure or threats from them?" Clara remembered her father's final words. "They've disowned me," she said softly. "I'm sorry," Selena said gently. "If needed, we can file a restraining order." Clara didn't answer immediately. She looked around her apartment, her own space, her own rules, her own silence. "I think I'm okay. For now." That night, Clara told David everything. About Ethan, about the call from her father, about how she didn't feel broken, just finally free. "You did the right thing," David said quietly. "But I lost my family." David reached for her hand. "No, you lost the people who abused you and called it love. Real family doesn't take. It shows up. It stands beside you. It respects who you are." Clara nodded slowly, letting his words settle into the empty space where guilt used to live. She hadn't lost everything. She was starting over. And for the first time it would be on her terms. The courtroom was smaller than Clara expected. No grand pillars, no echoing ceilings, just beige walls, a wooden bench, and a judge who looked like she'd seen 100 broken families walk through her door. But for Clara, this wasn't just another hearing. It was the moment she stood up not just for herself, but for every version of her that had ever stayed silent. Lauren and Carter entered through the side door with their attorney. Their expressions were tight, resentful. Lauren wouldn't meet Clara's eyes. Carter, on the other hand, stared at her like she had ruined his life. Maybe she had, but not in the way he imagined. Ethan sat beside Clara, wearing a suit 2 sizes too big, hands clasped nervously. David was on her other side, calm and steady as always. When the judge entered, everyone rose. Then it began. The prosecution presented the financial records first. Clear, chronological, undeniable. Transfers made without consent. A digital trail that led straight from Clara's phone to accounts registered under her sister, brother-in-law, and mother. Then came Clara's own testimony. She spoke clearly, steadily, recounting the moment she opened her app, the confrontation, the manipulation masked as duty. Then Ethan stood. His voice shook at first, but he found his rhythm. I overheard them planning to take the money. They said Clara wouldn't fight back because she owed the family. They knew what they were doing. That was the turning point. Even the defense lawyer's arguments about family misunderstanding fell flat under the weight of Ethan's words and Clara's documentation. When the judge finally spoke, her tone was grave. The defendants, Lauren Hughes and Carter Hughes, are hereby found guilty of unauthorized access and theft. The court sentences each of you to 3 years of supervised probation. In addition, you are ordered to repay the victim, Ms. Clara Bennett, the full amount of $8,400. You are also to pay $5,000 in damages for emotional distress. She paused. Furthermore, a 5-year restraining order is issued against both defendants. Any attempt to contact Ms. Bennett, directly or indirectly, will be considered a violation and result in immediate legal consequences. Lauren gasped. Carter muttered something under his breath. But Clara remained still. This was justice, not revenge, not retribution, just the return of balance. And truth. As they left the courtroom, Lauren's eyes met Clara's for the briefest second. But it wasn't hate Clara saw, it was fear. Not just of the law, but of consequence, of accountability, of finally being seen for what she was. Outside, the sky was overcast, but Clara felt light. You okay? David asked. She nodded. Yeah, I think I really am. That evening, Clara and David met his parents, Estella and Richard Callahan, for dinner in the suburbs. They had heard the full story by now. Estella reached across the table and placed a gentle hand over Clara's. You're part of our family now, she said. And around here, that means being safe and being respected. Tears welled up in Clara's eyes, not from pain, from something new, something she'd almost forgotten how to feel, belonging. As they left the restaurant, Ethan was waiting on the sidewalk. His hands were in his pockets again, his posture uncertain. Clara smiled and ran to hug him. What are you doing here? She asked. He looked sheepish. I heard from David. I just wanted to say congratulations. And thank you for not giving up on me. Clara pulled back. What will you do now? I'm moving to Denver. Found a job here. I want to be close to the only real family I've got left. Clara looked at him for a long time. You'll always have a place here, Ethan. Always. That night, as she lay beside David, his hand wrapped around hers, Clara realized something profound. She hadn't just won a case. She had reclaimed her voice, her worth, her boundaries, and she'd begun to build a new kind of family, one chosen with care, not dictated by blood. A week after the verdict, the days passed with a strange kind of stillness. No angry calls, no guilt-drenched messages, no knocks on the door. Clara's world had finally gone quiet. She wasn't used to it, but this quiet wasn't hollow, it was whole. One Saturday afternoon, David told her to dress warm and not ask questions. Clara raised a brow, but followed his lead, bundling up in her long camel coat and scarf. He drove them west, toward the foothills of the Rockies, as golden light spilled across the fading winter sky. They arrived at a secluded lake just outside Denver. The surface of the water shimmered under the soft light, surrounded by pine trees dusted in early spring frost. And right at the edge of the dock, a table set for two. Candles flickered gently under glass. A bottle of wine rested in a silver cooler. Clara's eyes widened. "What is this?" David smiled. "A new chapter." They ate quietly, the silence between them now soft, not tense. They spoke of things beyond the past, travel plans, books, what kind of dog they might one day adopt. The kind of conversations people have when life feels possible again. As twilight turned to dusk, David stood. He walked around the table and took her hands. "Clara," he said, his voice low and certain, "these past few months, I've watched you fight for yourself in a way most people never find the courage to do. You stood against people who should have protected you, and you protected yourself." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small blue velvet box. Clara's breath caught. David knelt, opened it. Inside was a simple, stunning diamond ring that sparkled like the surface of the lake. "I don't want to fix you," he said, "because you were never broken. I just want to build something new with you. Clara Bennett, will you marry me?" Tears blurred her vision, not from grief, not from loss, but from the overwhelming, quiet realization that she was finally being chosen, not out of need, not out of guilt, but from love. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." They embraced under the stars, the sound of water lapping gently behind them, the wind crisp with the scent of pine. For once, Clara didn't look back, not toward her past, not toward what she had lost, only forward. A few days later, a letter arrived at her apartment. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note, folded carefully. "Dear Clara, you may not remember me, but I'm Jenna Matthews, Carter's cousin. We met once at a barbecue years ago. I just wanted to say thank you. I was in a similar situation for years. My family used me, always calling it help or being there. And I stayed quiet, but after hearing what you did, I finally told them no. You gave me courage. It's not just about the money. It's about finally saying I deserve better. Thank you for reminding me I have the right to say that." Clara pressed the letter to her chest. In that moment, she understood something deeper than any court ruling could offer. This wasn't just justice for her. It was a ripple, a signal, a silent permission for others to protect themselves too. Later that night, as she sat curled beside David on the couch, he looked over and smiled. "You okay?" Clara nodded. "Better than okay." He kissed the top of her head. "You're not alone anymore." And she believed him, because this time, family wasn't blood. It wasn't duty. It wasn't silence in the face of harm. It was safety. It was love. It was a choice. The news story aired late on a Tuesday night. Clara hadn't known it was coming. Detective Selena Ward had only mentioned internal awareness campaigns. But there it was, a small segment titled "The Hidden Epidemic: Financial Crimes Within Families." Her name wasn't used. Her face wasn't shown. But her story was unmistakably hers. The broadcast featured anonymous voiceovers, reconstructed text messages, a simple graph showing the staggering rise in familial financial abuse among adult children with high incomes. Clara watched it from her living room, David's arm draped around her, Ethan sitting on the floor cross-legged with a bowl of popcorn untouched beside him. By the time the segment ended, Clara's phone was buzzing nonstop. Not from Lauren, not from Barbara, not even from Philip. These were strangers, dozens of them. Some had found her on LinkedIn. Others sent messages through mutual contacts. Many were short. "I thought I was the only one. Thank you for speaking up, even anonymously. Your story gave me the courage to finally confront my mother." I froze when I saw the screen. I've been through that exact moment too. Clara read each one slowly, tears building not from pain, but from something stronger. Purpose. Later that week, a second letter arrived from Jenna Matthews, the cousin who had written to her after the trial. Dear Clara, I wanted you to know that because of your strength, I didn't just walk away. I started over. I got my own place. I opened new accounts. I cut off contact with those who only remembered I existed when they needed something. You gave me a map, and for the first time in years, I'm not afraid. Thank you. Truly. J.M. Clara placed the letter inside a journal she'd started keeping since the trial, a small, leather-bound book she called Legacy. On the first page, she had written, "This is what happens when you stop apologizing for protecting your peace." Months passed. The court-ordered restitution was slowly repaid, not voluntarily but enforced. The $8,400 came back in small portions, garnished directly from Carter and Lauren's accounts. The $5,000 in emotional damages arrived as a lump sum after their tax refund was frozen. And while the money mattered, it wasn't the win Clara carried. What mattered was this: Nicholas lost his job. Carter's professional license was suspended. Their house was quietly listed for sale. Barbara and Philip, though not criminally charged, were named in the civil case and ordered to cease contact under court order. None of them ever reached out again. Ethan flourished in Denver, eventually moving just 2 blocks from Clara and David. He came over for dinner every Sunday, always bringing dessert and apologizing for it being store-bought. Clara never minded. On a warm spring morning, Clara received an email from a nonprofit director who had seen the news story. They were building a community initiative to help victims of family-based financial abuse. Would she be willing to share her experience, privately, anonymously, as part of a peer training program? Clara didn't hesitate. She wrote back, "Yes, count me in." She was no longer just the victim of a theft. She was a woman who had redrawn the lines, who had taught others to say no with clarity, who had proven that love without respect is not love at all. That weekend, as she sat beside David at their favorite cafe, watching the city wake around them, he reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Clara smiled. How something as horrible as betrayal turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. She looked out the window, where a little girl in a red raincoat was skipping through puddles. No fear, no shame, just freedom. And Clara realized she hadn't lost her family. She had found it. She hadn't been erased. She had rewritten everything. And this peace, this strength, this life was hers. Finally,